Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with me today. Have you ever wondered why some conversations feel like you're building this magnificent, sturdy bridge, while others just feel like you're slamming face first into a solid brick wall? Well, in this session, we're going to look really closely at the architecture of human understanding. I want you to think about how we build, and let's be honest, how we accidentally block our daily communications. It is very much like constructing a building. You need a rock-solid foundation, clear pathways, and a deep understanding of the structural loads. But what actually happens when we put up walls where there should be open doors? So why do our ideas so often get lost in translation? Seriously, take a second and really think about it. Recall a recent time when your perfectly clear message, something that made total sense in your own head, crashed right into an invisible wall the absolute second it reached someone else. You knew exactly what you meant to say, right? Yet the other person heard something completely different. It's an incredibly frustrating experience. You walk away feeling unheard, maybe even a little crazy. But the thing is, it's also entirely predictable once you understand the underlying mechanics of how we communicate. This happens with our partners at the dinner table, with our colleagues in high-stakes meetings, and even in how we process information all by ourselves. All right, part one, the anatomy of misunderstanding. Okay, let's dive into this. Just like any good architectural blueprint, before we can even begin to build meaningful, lasting connections, we have to know why the structure fails in the first place. So we formally define barriers to effective communication as obstacles that prevent the smooth exchange of ideas and understanding. It's a fairly simple definition, sure, but it's actually profound. It tells us that miscommunication isn't just a lack of effort. It's not usually someone just intentionally being difficult. It's often an active obstruction. Something is physically or psychologically standing in the direct path of your idea. It's kind of like trying to drive a car down a highway littered with concrete roadblocks. No matter how good of a driver you are, you're gonna get stuck if you don't first clear the path. When we break down these obstacles, we're actually dealing with a variety of very distinct walls that we inadvertently construct every single day: physical, perceptual, emotional, cultural, language, gender, and interpersonal. If your message has to navigate through even 2 or 3 of these filters at once, honestly, it's a miracle we understand each other at all. Just picture your average Monday morning meeting. You might be dealing with a spotty internet connection across time zones, navigating incredibly dense corporate jargon, trying to read a room full of diverse cultural backgrounds, all while managing your own internal stress about an impending deadline. It is a literal communication minefield. Moving right along to section 2, external and systemic barriers. We're going to divide these 7 walls into a few distinct categories. First, let's shift our focus to the structural flaws that exist completely outside of our own minds, the external forces and systemic realities that just disrupt our messages. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast. On one side, we have physical barriers. These arise from environmental factors. Think of a super loud construction site right outside your office window, the sheer distance of trying to coordinate across continents, or a glitchy video call dropping your voice. On the other side, language barriers. These pop up when there are vocabulary, grammar, or fluency gaps. And by the way, a language barrier isn't just about speaking Spanish versus English. It can literally be a marketing team using all these corporate buzzwords that leave the engineering team completely bewildered. Both environmental chaos and missing the right vocabulary are structurally damaging to the transmission of your idea. Next, we look at the systemic, societal barriers that shape how entire groups interact. Cultural barriers emerge when differences in traditions, values, or social norms exist. Look, if you're communicating with someone whose cultural traditions heavily prioritize indirect politeness and group consensus, but you're coming in with a blunt, highly direct business style, you are hitting a massive cultural wall. Now compare that to gender barriers, which reflect differences in communication styles or broader societal expectations. Societal conditioning often places entirely different expectations around assertiveness versus accommodation, depending on gender. That can radically alter how a perfectly neutral statement is interpreted in a leadership setting. These are deeply ingrained blueprints we carry into every single conversation. All right, part 3, internal and relational obstacles. Now that we've mapped out the outside world, let's move the explainer inward. We're transitioning away from the systemic walls around us to the internal psychological roadblocks we build within ourselves. Perceptual barriers occur when individuals interpret information differently. This is all about our internal biases, our assumptions, and our limited awareness, silently distorting information before our brains even fully process it. Think of perceptual barriers as an invisible filter, bending the light without you even realizing it's happening. Compare that to emotional barriers, which stem from strong feelings like anger, fear, or mistrust. While perceptual filters are totally silent, emotional barriers are turbulent forces that actively warp how a message is expressed or received. For example, if you're terrified of losing your job, you literally cannot hear a piece of constructive criticism the same way you would if you were feeling completely secure. And that leads us to the final and honestly most crucial internal roadblock: interpersonal barriers. These arise from poor relationships, a lack of trust, or ineffective listening between individuals. Guys, this is the ultimate disconnect. You can have the best video equipment on the market, a completely shared vocabulary, identical cultural backgrounds, but if your relational foundation is lacking trust, the entire architectural structure of your communication will collapse. Imagine suspecting a colleague has a hidden agenda. Suddenly, a completely harmless email just asking for a quick project update is interpreted as a hostile, micromanaging threat. Trust is literally the mortar that holds all the bricks together. Section 4. Strategies for clear communication. Now that we've surveyed the damage and identified all 7 walls, we need some actionable tools for demolition and rebuilding. Because removing these barriers doesn't just happen by accident, it requires a precise tool-to-task relationship. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly they pair up. To conquer physical obstacles, you improve the infrastructure. To reduce perceptual and emotional blocks, you must foster empathy. You bridge diversity gaps by actively promoting cultural awareness. You gain clarity by enhancing language skills, and to minimize gender differences, you encourage equality. You absolutely cannot fix a language barrier by just buying a better microphone, and you definitely cannot fix a broken trust dynamic by sending someone to a grammar class, right? You have to apply the right deliberate effort to the exact correct wall. Section 5, the architecture of connection. We are now transitioning to the final phase of our blueprint. What does the finished structure actually look like when we actively apply these deliberate efforts? Well, let's move to and see how this builds into a highly structured process for success across personal, professional, and social contexts. Step 1 is pouring the foundation. Actively address the communication barriers we just laid out. You've got to clear the site first. Step 2 forms the walls. You use those newly cleared pathways to build trust, which directly strengthens those interpersonal connections. And finally, step 3 is the roof over our heads, ensuring shared understanding and collaboration. When you follow this architectural sequence, communication completely stops being a stressful game of chance and becomes a reliable, well-engineered bridge. So the crucial point is this ultimate goal right here. By actively addressing these barriers, communication becomes more effective, ensuring shared understanding, collaboration, and progress. We don't just clear these hurdles for the sake of talking clearly or just sounding smart in a meeting. We do it for meaningful collaboration. We do it so that teams can actually build products together, so that partners can build lives together, and so that society as a whole can actually make progress instead of just endlessly shouting into a void. We've covered the blueprint, we've identified the structural flaws, and we've laid out the specific tools needed for the rebuild. So I want to leave you with one final provocative challenge. Which invisible wall will you tear down today? Will you foster just a little more empathy to break through a perceptual barrier? Will you put in the extra effort to decode the jargon causing a language disconnect? Or perhaps you'll finally build up the trust necessary to shatter an interpersonal wall. The tools are now in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I absolutely cannot wait to see what you build.